What WTF confession in court turned the defendant into the real victim? Story 1. I was a juror on what looked like the easiest shoplift case ever. A woman stole an electric toothbrush and a jar of coffee. We watched clear footage. Security guard stops her. Bag has the merch. Then loss prevention's boss takes the stand. Defense asks why the video shows a cashier placing the items in the woman's tote. The boss smirks. That's the shrink protocol. The room goes dead quiet. Under oath, he explains they seed carts and bags to confirm intent, then file an insurance claim for the loss. When the judge asks if they do this without consent, he shrugs. Everyone does it. We're incentivized for claims. The prosecutor shifts in her chair. Defense brings up a do not serve list. Turns out the defendant was in it for returning defective items and arguing about expired coupons. They recognized her and ran the play. The boss, sweating now, admits associates get bonuses for documented thefts, and insurance audits were light. The judge has him repeat it twice for the record. Case dismissed on the spot, referral for fraud investigations, and the woman, who walked in braced for a misdemeanor, walked out as the person a corporation practiced on. We never even deliberated. The store went from victim to defendant in under 10 minutes, courtesy of one jaw-dropping confession that was supposed to help the prosecution. Story 2. I sat 3 rows back for a domestic assault hearing, killing time before traffic court. The story was awful. Boyfriend beat his ex, photos of bruises, tearful GoFundMe posts, texts calling him a monster. Defense asks to play a cloud video. On screen, the ex and a friend in a bathroom, pressing frozen coins and a spoon against her skin, chatting about even color and 2 days of staying power. Audible gasps. She screams that it's deep-faked, but then counsel shows the phone's metadata from her account. Under cross, the friend breaks first. They ran a closed chat where they taught others how to document, which juiced donation links. The defendant produces receipts of late-night pharmacy runs, ride shares he paid for, and a text thread where she thanks him for bringing me soup. Sorry I'm dramatic. The final straw? Prosecutor asks why the fundraiser stayed open after she'd already moved. She blurts, because algorithms like ongoing danger. Case dismissed, restitution hearing scheduled, and the judge apologized to the guy on record. Said he was a target of a monetized storyline. The wildest part was how fast abuser became content source, and the defendant turned into a guy who got farmed for sympathy clicks. Story 3. I'm a grad TA who got subpoenaed in a case where a student supposedly hacked the lab server to steal a professor's draft. The kid swore he was retrieving his own data. IT Security's lead, buttoned up, scripted, testifies about unauthorized access and escalated privileges. Defense asks who reset the student's password 3 days prior. Silence. The log shows the reset originated from an admin terminal in the PY's office. Judge orders a recess. When we resume, the IT lead looks seasick. Under oath, he admits the PI told him to hand the student temporary credentials to see what he'd do after the PI had quietly copied the student's dataset into a new patent folder under his own name. The honeypot was supposed to catch the student opening the wrong directory. Instead, it caught the PI authorizing the access he later called a crime. Then defense displays an email where the PI wrote, "Once we nail him, the grant audit goes away." Translation: the PI had misallocated funds and needed a scandal to eclipse it. The courtroom flipped. Prosecution asked to null pros. The judge set a hearing on sanctions. The student, who came in as a hacker, left as the whistleblower who'd been framed by his mentor's trap. Academia cosplay turned into a perjury parade in under an hour. Story 4. Traffic docket, 9 a.m. A routine DUI. Body cam shows a wobbly walk. Breath test printout says 0.11. Defense is unusually calm. They ask the arresting officer when his unit's breathalyzer was last calibrated. Last month, he says. Defense slides over maintenance logs. The serial number belongs to another precinct, signed by him. Under oath, He admits his supervisor told them to share calibration records because the vendor was backlogged and quotas were non-negotiable. He copied a clean log and swapped in his unit ID later. Then the kicker. His field sobriety wobble came from making the defendant remove a medical boot. A podiatry note backs it up. The judge leans forward. "You falsified a government record to sustain an arrest?" The officer stares at the floor and says yes. Case dismissed. Immediate referral to internal affairs, and the defendant, painted as a reckless driver, was just a guy with a broken foot and a cop padding stats. One bad signature turned the entire prosecution into confetti. Story 5. Housing court, but with a criminal twist. A tenant charged with felony vandalism for flooding her apartment and ruining the unit below. Landlord shows photos of burst pipes and mold, says she refused repairs. Defense calls the building's former super, who'd been fired. He looks exhausted and asks for immunity. Under oath, he says management ordered him to close the sprinkler valve on the tenant's line and loop the hallway camera feed on a USB. Why? The tenant was rent-controlled and organizing in the building. Insurance plus constructive eviction would clear her out. Emails appear. A property manager boasting that 2 problem units were handled after water events. The super admits he kicked the standpipe to crack the union, then waited for the weekend storm to mask it. The tenant had dozens of repair tickets ignored. Timestamps match the looped footage. The prosecutor's face drains. Charges dropped, the judge refers the owner to the AG, and the tenant, accused of wrecking her own home, turns out to be the target of an eviction by disaster plan. The confession was so bald it felt like satire, except it was sworn and recorded. Story 6. Surgical nurse gets charged with narcotics diversion after an audit shows 4 vials of fentanyl missing from an anesthesia cart under her login. Pharmacy logs say she wasted none. A patient coded the same night, and the hospital wants a villain. In court, compliance brings their guy, a stern director with a binder. Under cross, defense asks about ghost waste. He hesitates. Judge tells him to answer. He admits they routinely entered fake waste events in the EMR to make dose totals line up during a shortage, and that he personally instructed IT to keep nurses' credentials auto-logged on carts to reduce workflow friction. So how did her ID get tied to missing vials? He used her session to reconcile a double dose the anesthesiologist gave during an airway panic, because the doc was a star who shouldn't have variants. When DEA requested records, he froze, filed a theft report, and let security yank the nurse's locker for optics. Then comes the real grenade. He'd been warned 2 months prior that the cart's barcode scanner misreads when vials are cold, producing phantom withdrawals. He put off the service ticket until after joint commission. The courtroom shifts. Prosecutor looks ill. The nurse hadn't stolen anything. She was the scapegoat for a metrics game plus a frozen scanner. Case dismissed, referral to state board for the hospital, not her. She came in the defendant and walked out the employee a system tried to sacrifice to keep a surgeon's dashboard green. Story 7. Independent hauler gets nailed for illegal hazardous dumping after paint sludge shows up in a creek. City Waves photos of his truck shows RFID pings from a landfill gate he supposedly bypassed. Defense calls the fired former route supervisor. He asks for immunity. Judge grants. He confesses the city's prime contractor was about to miss federal abatement targets. Their fix? Swap geotags and loop dashcam footage for subcontractors flagged non-compliant. A list that included the defendant because he'd refused to kick back Saturdays off the books. They planted an RFID sticker inside his tarp roll so his tag would ping when any rig with a compatible scanner drove by. Meanwhile, the sludge came from a municipal maintenance yard that quietly dumped overnight to dodge surcharge limits. Emails surface. Need 2 scapegoats before the quarterly, plus a spreadsheet literally labeled liability transfer. The supervisor admits he coached inspectors to write up driver chose convenience drop language because it plays well with juries. The defendant's real manifest shows he queued at the legitimate site for 97 minutes that night. GPS corroborates. Prosecutor moves to dismiss before the defense finishes. The hauler, painted as an environmental menace, was a small business owner targeted by a contractor gaming grants. The court refers the prime contractor to the state AG. The defendant gets his license back with an apology on the record. Story 8. Teen is charged with arson that sparked a canyon wildfire. The sheriff's press conference weeks earlier had been neat. Confiscated fireworks, a terrified kid, angry homeowners. In court, the utilities subcontractor safety manager arrives with a rehearsed timeline. Defense asks a simple question. Who overrode reclosers the morning of red flag warnings? He blinks. Under oath, he admits they set lines to manual hold to keep service metrics high during a VIP event downtown. A spacer had been fraying on a wind-exposed span. A lineman had filed 2 hazard tickets that were pending parts. The plan, he says, was to get through the weekend and fix Monday. When the conductor slapped, it showered dry grass. He emailed his boss, "We can tie this to the juvenile fireworks stop from last week, right?" The arrest report suddenly looks convenient. The deputy who found the spent tubes has to admit he got that tip from the safety manager's office. Metallurgy report shows the ignition point sits under the sagging line, not the picnic area. The manager, pale now, says PR told him, "Contain the narrative or we eat the subrogation." The judge halts the trial, scolds the state, and invites the feds to review. The teen, who'd been doxxed and called an arsonist, turns out to be a prop in a utilities metrics cosplay. Case dismissed, record sealed, and the utility stares at a stack of subpoenas. Story 9. Gig courier gets slapped with felony card skimming after a cluster of frauds hit customers on his route. Bank investigator testifies about a device fingerprint tying multiple bad transactions to his phone's MAC address. Defense asks how the tool works. Investigator relaxes, finally home turf, and brags it hoovers all nearby Bluetooth identifiers and correlates loss events. Under cross, he admits they started doing that because internal policy pays recovery bonuses when liability shifts to a merchant device. Translation: catch a warm body with a phone and call it a point of compromise. Then defense shows he visited the restaurant for interviews the day the fraud spiked, with his phone broadcasting like any other. The tool scooped him as proximity and never cleared him. Worse, the courier's phone was in airplane mode during 2 of the charges. Rideshare logs and app telemetry prove it. Investigator squirms. An email appears where his boss writes, "We need a narrative that sticks. Lone actor easiest." The coup de grace is a video from the restaurant's POS vendor showing a known memory scraper on the terminal, patched the week after. Prosecutor quietly moves to dismiss. The courier, publicly labeled a thief, was collateral in a bank's bonus-driven blame machine. The judge orders the bank to notify cardholders of the true compromise and to preserve all emails for regulators. Story 10. University proctoring scandal. A student faces expulsion and a criminal charge after a micro-earbud falls out during a midterm search. The contracted head proctor testifies that he spotted suspicious hand-to-ear gestures, called a sweep, and discovered the device in the student's hoodie seam. Defense asks about his side business. He denies any. Then they roll a screen recording, a private Discord where his alias sells tutoring packages that include exam environment advice. Stripe and Venmo receipts traced to him. Under oath, he says it's just coaching. Defense calls a freshman who bought a package. She says he promised leniency on incidental flags. When she refused to pay for a platinum tier, her friend, our defendant, filed a complaint about pushy sales DMs. 2 weeks later, the proctor caught him. Lab photos reveal the earbud's magnet carrier uses glue not sold on campus, but the same type found in the proctor's office craft drawer, documented in a training video. Finally, a custodian testifies that the proctor asked where lost and found hoodies were kept the day before the exam. He shrinks and admits he planted the bud to punish a whistleblower and scare the market back to him. Case tossed, university suspends the contract, and the student, accused of cheating, becomes the victim of a paid invigilator running a shakedown disguised as integrity. Story 11. Immigration court is usually hushed, but this one buzzed. A Guatemalan mother charged with material misrepresentation after her credible fear interview read like a script. Gang names wrong, dates nonsense. The interpreter who handled her file strode in with a leather portfolio and that bored pro vibe. Defense asked him to translate a short Keisha clip from her WhatsApp to her sister, recorded the day before the interview. He squinted and said, "That's not Keisha. It's some village slang." The public defender, who'd grown up speaking it, translated instead. It matched her written affidavit perfectly. Under oath, the interpreter finally cracked. He'd been standardizing rural dialects by swapping in Spanish gang acronyms for clarity, and, here's the grenade, he sometimes cleaned timelines at the request of a coyote who paid him referral fees for clients kept in motion. Why keep them in motion? Because deportations meant the smuggler got a second payment to bring them again. He admitted he reworded the mother's testimony to look coached, then told a DHS officer she was fabricating. The courtroom went silent. Even the ICE attorney put down his pen. Defense produced Zelle receipts labeled interpretation bonus, plus a Telegram chat where he bragged about fixing stories so asylum fraud is obvious. Judge vacated the misrep charge, ordered a new independent interpreter, and referred the interpreter for prosecution and bar from the contractor roster. The woman who walked in as a liar left as the person someone literally profited from discrediting. The WTF wasn't just the confession. It was realizing a middleman had been tilting the floor beneath dozens of cases because chaos paid twice. Story 12. Family court with a criminal edge. A dad faced a contempt charge and a misdemeanor for violating a protective order by stepping onto school grounds during his daughter's recital. The mother's therapist, credential alphabet spilling off her card, testified he was escalatory and obsessive, citing therapy notes that predated the recital by a week. Defense put those notes on a screen and zoomed in on the metadata, created 4 hours after the police call, backdated by the EMR's draft date feature. Under cross, the therapist said backdating was standard to reflect therapeutic frames. Then the email surfaced. She'd written the mother, "Send the invite to his old account. He'll see public posts anyway. If he shows, that's unsafe contact." She also forwarded a high-conflict parenting grant prospectus that paid double for cases with documented order violations. Asked point-blank if she advised setting a situation likely to produce a technical violation, she whispered, "I suggested boundaries with documentation." The gal shifted, then admitted he cut and pasted her risk language into his report before interviewing the father. The kicker, school security video showed the dad never approached the mother or child section. He sat in the back, left a stuffed rabbit with the usher, and walked out. Judge tossed the criminal count, sealed the contempt, and barred the therapist from submitting further reports pending review. The dad, who'd been painted as a stalker, turned out to be the mark for a grant-greased paper trail. The confession wasn't cinematic, it was clinical, an admission that the helping apparatus had engineered the breach it was paid to fix. Story 13. The night janitor looked doomed in a museum theft case. Missing modernist canvas, his keycard last in the storage wing, resale chatter on a shadowy Discord. The registrar took the stand, sleek suit, weary sigh, and explained deaccession protocols with museum speak that made everyone drowsy. Defense asked why the insurance schedule still listed the painting at full value if it had been considered for deaccession. Registrar said that was clerical lag. Then came the internal Slack dump, a channel named Sunset Project, with the registrar coaching a dealer on how to age a fraudulent provenance letter and chatting about a quiet exit for a work donor blocked from sale. Under oath, face-draining, he admitted he'd created a fake theft narrative to move the painting through a Cayman shell, planning to recover it later as a donation to a friendly foundation, scoring a tax deduction and a reputation bump, while pinning the original disappearance on a replaceable overnight worker. The keycard logs? He'd staged them by asking the janitor to check a leaking HVAC closet after hours, then manually toggled the vault door to generate an anomaly alert. The Discord chatter? A burner account seeded with the janitor's gamertag scraped from staff Wi-Fi logs. Insurance counsel, suddenly white-knuckled, asked for a recess. Prosecutor moved to dismiss and flagged potential art fraud charges against the registrar. The janitor, who'd stood there like a ghost no one cared about, became the person a cultural gatekeeper tried to feed into a provenance shredder. The court ordered the museum to produce the canvas within 48 hours and preserve every chat. High art, low con. Story 14. Medicaid fraud trial in a one-dentist town. 247 claims for periodontal scaling in 6 months flagged as impossible volume. The state's star witness was a rep from the clinic's cloud EHR, pointing to audit trails proving the dentist upcoded and auto-signed phantom charts. Defense asked about the product's smart coding toggle. The rep smiled. It assists documentation. Under oath, under pressure, he conceded their sales team turned it on by default for pilot success, auto-populating pocket depths and bleeding indices if 2 boxes were ticked, sometimes pre-filling plans to the highest reimbursable code. Why did the trails show the dentist signed them? Because the EHR batched e-signatures when the browser refreshed. An optimization that collapsed 5 minutes of charting into one timestamp. The rep's emails surfaced. Rural sites need wins. Set auto-suggest to aggressive or we'll lose the state contract. He also admitted he trained the office manager to fix rejected claims by toggling clinical intent met, which retro-generated findings. The dentist, it turned out, had done plenty of cleanings and some legitimate scaling. The software had conjured the rest, then attributed it to him. The judge, yanking off his glasses, asked whether the vendor informed clinics that assistive features generate billable diagnoses. "It's in the webinar," the rep said, voice cracking. Case dismissed with prejudice, referral to the AG's Consumer Division for the vendor, and a stern order that the state stop using claim counts from AI documentation as evidence of intent. The small-town dentist wasn't a mastermind. He was a beta tester with a target on his back. Story 15. Wildlife court over a photographer accused of baiting a black bear for a viral shot. Felony harassment plus a park ban. Rangers had found sardine tins and marshmallows near his blind. His SD cards showed the bear approaching at dawn, open and shut, until the seasonal ranger supervisor was called. Under cross, she admitted she'd run a compliance initiative tied to a grant that required a 15% rise in negative human-wildlife interactions citations year over year to renew. Her team prepositioned attraction indicators on known violation corridors to stress test visitor ethics. Translation: they put attractants near likely blinds. She said the tins should have been marked to distinguish training caches. They weren't. Then a volunteer, hands shaking, testified he'd been told to sweep high-traffic hashtags and invite shooters to the ridge with GPS pins, then monitor outcomes. The court watched a screen recording where the supervisor, using an alt, DM'd our defendant a pin and wrote, "Fog lifts by 5:10, berries on slope." The tins were logged to a supply requisition the week before, signed by her. Finally, the bear biologist explained the approach pattern matched an animal habituated elsewhere, not bait conditioned overnight. The judge suppressed the physical evidence as government created, called the case manufactured conflict, and ordered the park to review its grant practices. The photographer, dragged online as a wildlife harasser, was the target of a quota-chasing sting that forgot to label its own props. The confession hit like a thunderclap. Protection metrics had devoured the very ethics they were meant to enforce. Story 16. County prosecutor rolled in a cold storage cart like a prop and charged the embalmer with abuse of a corpse after a family found mold on a viewing day. The funeral home's operations manager, slick hair, clipped answers, was supposed to bury her. Defense asked him to explain why 3 decedents had identical cremation timestamps. He blurted that their software rounds. Then came the invoices, dry ice purchases at 0 for 2 months, and a line item for third-party anatomical services. Under oath, his voice thinned. They'd stopped running the walk-in cooler to save diesel during generator repair, used her rubber-stamped signature to approve priority cremations, and, here's the gut punch, sold 1 unclaimed body to a broker under a medical research euphemism. When the broker delivered late, the body decomposed on site. He told staff to wipe coils with bleach and blame the embalmer's technique. Why frame her? Because the owner's liability coverage excludes commercial transfer, and pinning professional negligence on an employee keeps the policy live. He admitted he kept her login active on a tablet to auto-sign releases while she was home on call. The judge made him repeat it twice for the record. Charges against her collapsed mid-testimony. The court referred the home for fraud, desecration, and unlicensed disposition. The woman who arrived as the monster became what she'd been all along, the only person in the building who kept logging complaints about a dead cooler no one wanted to fix. Story 17. Booster Club drama turned criminal. A youth soccer coach was accused of siphoning $18,742 via the team's payment app. Parents were livid. Screen grabs showed refunds to his name. League treasurer took the stand, all righteousness and spreadsheets. Defense asked him to explain a merchant ID mismatch between the booster account and the tournament vendor. He called it a routing quirk. Subpoenaed bank logs hit the projector. He'd created a sub-merchant under his LLC, then marked legitimate gear purchases as chargebacks, so funds auto-routed to his account as recovery fees. Under oath, the treasurer admitted the vendor's fraud prevention partner paid him bounties for any case with a named individual culprit instead of systemic error, and he, accelerated narratives by exporting the coach's name from the app's admin view onto receipt PDFs. Why the coach? He'd refused to bench a talented kid after the treasurer's son lost his starting spot. The clincher, stadium camera footage from the infamous ATM run, showed the coach depositing cash from a car wash fundraiser, the very stack the treasurer later labeled embezzled. The judge tossed the case, ordered restitution to the coach, and told the DA to consider charges against the treasurer. The guy everyone booed in the parking lot was a volunteer eating dust, while a numbers man gamed a payments back-end for petty revenge and per-incident bonuses. Story 18. A railroad engineer faced negligent homicide after a low-speed yard derailment shoved a maintenance worker between 2 cars. Prosecutor said he ignored a stop signal. The dispatch supervisor came in crisp and confident with a laser pointer, narrating green and red dots on a big screen. Defense asked one question. Who authorized PTC bypass for Track 7 at 0311? He said nobody. Then the event recorder printout appeared, showing a manual override code tied to his login. Under oath, he confessed, ops demanded no red minutes during a VIP inspection and told dispatch to run yard leads hot, babysit by radio, and re-enable automatic braking before sunrise. When a switch sensor started ghosting, he cleared the alarm and stacked 2 movements into the same block, trusting chatter. He'd also told IT to suppress alert emails because management hated waking up. The engineer's cab never got a stop. His radio crackled with overlapping chatter and a clipped clear from a trainee. The supervisor admitted he edited the post-incident log to reconstruct intent before the FRA request landed. The judge stared so hard you could hear the projector fan. Case dismissed, referral to federal investigators, and the engineer who'd been plastered across news chyrons as reckless walked out a widower-level wreck of a man who had, in fact, been driving blind because someone upstairs chose punctuality over physics. Story 19. The embryologist's hands shook as she faced felony negligence. 18 embryos lost overnight when an incubator held temp at 39 degrees Celsius. Parents sobbed in the gallery. The device manufacturer's field engineer, polished, sympathetic, arrived to clarify. Defense asked why the unit's firmware version didn't match the FDA-cleared build. He called it a minor patch. Logs told a different story. A beta pushed after hours through a maintenance port the clinic never authorized. Under oath, he admitted he'd installed adaptive fan curves to reduce noise complaints at a VIP clinic and never rolled back. When heat sensors started cycling, he coached the lab manager to reboot instead of taking the chamber offline because downtime kills ratings. The alarm silence, the state said the embryologist clicked. A background process he triggered to avoid waking the on-call doc during a company audit week. Most obscene, a Slack message where marketing asked whether a lab error narrative would contain reputational risk better than vendor firmware issue. He said yes. The defense showed she'd filed 3 temperature anomaly tickets. He'd closed them as environmental. The judge dismissed with prejudice and ordered preservation of all vendor communications for regulators. The woman accused of the unforgivable hadn't killed anyone's future. A sales-driven beta had, and she'd been turned into the human shield for it. Story 20. A postal carrier was charged with mail theft after holiday gift cards vanished along his route. Inspectors brought heat-mapped scans and a sting parcel opened on his shift. Loss Prevention's regional head, square jaw, clipped sentences, walked the jury through a tidy narrative. Defense asked him to read the internal memo subject line aloud. Peak pilots, loss attribution. His face changed. Under oath, he admitted they'd seeded high-value decoys on problem routes and quietly rerouted those parcels through a sorter bay staffed by temps to stress test integrity. The plan required a known actor to tie thefts to, so they tagged the carrier's handheld as the last custodian by delaying scan uploads from the sorter 2 hours. He also confessed they pulled his personnel file for social media pictures of sneakers and wrote, "Optics favorable, looks like motive, the kicker." The sting parcel's seal was broken in the facility. Camera 12 caught a supervisor re-sleeving the box. But that camera's feed was under maintenance when inspectors pulled it. Defense had the raw NVR export from a union rep who preserved it after hours. Case vaporized. The judge ordered the agency to notify every customer misled by the attribution scheme. The carrier who'd spent 6 months being hissed at on porches didn't steal a thing. He was the fixed point a quota-chasing program needed to draw a circle of blame around. Story 21. Airport court is usually yawn city until a musician shows up in cuffs for bringing a firearm component through security. X-ray stills show a slide plate tucked in her violin case. The contractor's training supervisor takes the stand, ready to talk best practices. Defense asks if his team uses planted test articles. He nods. Sealed pouches, barcodes, strict custody. Then the bomb. Under oath, he admits their quarterly audit had already failed that morning. If they failed twice, the contract got dinged. So he revalidated screeners by placing a test plate in a diverter bin. Except a gate agent, cleaning up a backlog, poured those bins into an active belt. The plate rode straight into the musician's tray. He didn't report the breach. He walked it through to secondary to manufacture a catch and fix their stats. When TSA asked why the pouch seal code didn't match, he says, voice shaking, "We reuse seals when inventory's tight." The courtroom went silent. Chain of custody logs show his initials after the bag was already flagged, meaning the evidence was created post-screening. Prosecutor, chalk white, moves to dismiss. The judge orders referrals to DOT and DHS. The violinist, accused of smuggling a gun part, was a prop in a contractor's audit theater, her case hijacked to patch a spreadsheet. Story 22. Food truck chef faces criminal negligence after a salmonella cluster puts 3 people in the ER. Health lab director testifies like a metronome, positive culture, serotype match, shutter the truck. Defense projects the chain of custody form, the tamper seal ID is crossed out and rewritten. Under cross, the director finally exhales. The lab had an internal contamination event that week, positive controls spilled in a biosafety hood, and he swapped a clean sample into the batch so the run wouldn't invalidate a grant-funded rapid response exercise. Later, to keep the outbreak narrative coherent, he reassigned the control result to the truck's sample. Why? His team needed publishable numbers before a CDC site visit. He even emailed staff not to over-communicate anomalies to field partners. Independent swabs from the truck, collected the same day, test negative at a university lab. Time temperature logs from the chef's cooler show safe ranges. The judge stares at the director. You relabeled a control as evidence. He nods. Case tossed, license reinstated, and the court asks the AG to review the lab's data integrity. The chef who got pilloried online as Typhoid Larry had done nothing wrong. The lab's shortcut turned him into the villain because an experiment needed a story arc. Story 23. A small-town teller is charged with embezzling $42,000 during an ATM reload. Dual control protocol? Ignored, says the bank's internal auditor, pointing at a neat timeline. Defense asks who generated the emergency override that lets a single person open the cassette. Auditor says the system auto-flagged it. Printouts say otherwise. The override came from his admin token at 7:13 p.m., minutes after the branch manager texted him, "We're short again." On the stand, he caves. The manager was gambling and kiting cash. To keep quarterly losses off the books, the auditor taught him to stage teller error nights, then backdate vault entries and export camera clips that excluded the keypad angle. He gave the teller a training login with broad rights, then used it to sign the bad event. When corporate fraud called, he fed them a narrative, new hire, weak controls, and slid in the teller's name. Finally, a freight company timestamp shows the teller across town signing for a coin shipment at the exact minute the vault supposedly opened. The case evaporates. Referrals fly to state banking regulators. The person branded a thief at church and grocery lines. He was the patsy in a tidy cover-up designed by the guy who wrote the checklist. Story 24. A stagehand gets indicted after a pyro cue burns a dancer mid-show. Video shows him at the console, cue fired hot, no permit on file. The producer, a charisma machine in velvet, testifies about rogue execution. Defense holds up a packing slip, 30 gerbs from an overseas warehouse, labeled as fog cartridges. Under oath, the producer admits he ordered gray market effects to dodge city licensing, swapped the cartridges himself, and told the licensed pyrotechnician to take the night off so union time wouldn't blow the budget. He also had the e-stop taped open because it popped the monitors in the lead's in-ears. The stagehand followed the cue stack he was given. The console had been reprofiled to treat a 5-second cooled gerb as a 1-second hot jet. Fire marshal emails show the producer forged a permit PDF by editing last year's date. Why blame the stagehand? Insurance exclusions for unapproved modifications would bankrupt the show unless negligence landed on an employee. The judge dismisses and orders OSHA on site before curtain ever rises again. The reckless techie had done his job. The impresario cut corners until someone bled, then tried to feed a crew member to the lawyers. Story 25. A shelter volunteer stands trial for burglary after stealing a pit mix the night before it was slated for euthanasia. Director testifies the dog failed 2 temperament tests and bit a handler. Defense pulls records. The bite photo is a cat scratch from a different file. On the stand, the director wilts. He'd signed a disposal contract with a hauler that gave the county a rebate if monthly capacity relief hit a threshold. Euphemism for euthanasia volume. Intake spiked after a fireworks week. Adoptions lagged. To avoid breaching the contract and losing his budget cushion, he instructed staff to mark big dogs rescue only with fabricated resource guarding notes that make adopters run. He also set a policy. Any dog not claimed by midnight Friday gets scheduled. The volunteer had emailed him proof of a foster approved for Saturday morning. He quietly denied it and moved the dog to the medical hold wing where the public can't see. Under oath, he admits he told night staff to keep volunteers out and let policy do its work. The jury hears a voicemail where the foster begs to come early. You can hear him hang up. Case dismissed. The county opens an investigation. The thief was saving a life from a spreadsheet that turned animals into quota math. Story 26. County jail case. An inmate was charged with introducing narcotics through legal mail. The envelope looked normal until an ion swab lit up like a Christmas tree, the body scanner pinged, and the DA paraded a mailroom integrity officer to explain their airtight process. Defense asked a childlike question. Who handles test articles for K9 drills? The officer sighed, then admitted under oath they'd been running realism days to keep seizure numbers up for a grant renewal. He misted trace training powder onto random dummy letters, then locked them in a bin labeled "Do Not Sort." A new clerk, slammed after count, dumped that bin into the live mail stream. The officer realized the mix-up but didn't report it. He wanted a win after 2 dry weeks. When the inmate's attorney letter popped hot, he bypassed escalation and walked it straight to internal security to notch a mail interdiction. Chain of custody logs showed his initials twice, before and after the alert, meaning he had his hands on the evidence both times. Defense produced footage of him palming a Ziploc of K9 stimulus that morning. Even the lot code matched the swab chromatogram. He insisted the powder can't trigger a felony, then conceded the field kit doesn't distinguish training compound from street fentanyl at threshold. Case dismissed mid-testimony. The judge referred the jail for evidentiary misconduct and ordered a review of every legal mail search that quarter. The guy hauled in as a smuggler was just a recipient of a botched pep rally dressed up as security. Story 27. County Fair Scandal. A 16-year-old barrel racer accused of doping a rival's mare. Caffeine and lidocaine in the blood work. Blue ribbon yanked. Sheriff called. The show steward entered gravely with a binder of chain of custody forms. Defense asked why the tail hair envelope for sample B had a second label underneath the first. He said, humidity. Under cross, the DQ'd rider's dad, also a sponsor, mysteriously had access to the holding barn. Then came the vet's confession. The steward asked him to correct a sloppy sample by swapping the labels to reflect the real horse, claiming a volunteer switched halters. The vet refused, but the steward peeled and restuck anyway because optics matter. Defense produced a phone clip from a 4-H mom, the steward spritzing the mare's flank after the cool-down with fly spray that a lab later found laced with topical analgesic. Why? The sponsor's daughter had knocked a barrel. Only way to bump her up was to nuke the rival on a test. The steward, sweating, admitted the fair needed a zero-tolerance headline after a messy rodeo incident last year. In open court, he said the quiet part. I thought a controlled positive would restore trust. The judge tossed the criminal charge, reinstated the win, and barred the steward for life. A kid painted as a cheat turned out to be the only adult in the ring. Story 28. Deed fraud case that started as trespass. A woman returned from shift to find her locks changed and her name missing from the recorder's site. The title company's closing manager testified she'd filed a corrective deed after a remote notarization glitch and that the defendant later fabricated Ellis pendants to stall a sale. Defense threw the RON, remote online notarization video, on the screen. 5 minutes of pixelated freeze frames, no audio, and the notary's seal animated with a vector tool, its rotation identical in 2 separate sessions. Asked about that, the manager confessed their pipeline was backed up. To hit quarter, she merged a failed RON with a prior identity-verified session, then pasted the acknowledgement onto a deed the seller hadn't signed. When the recorder flagged the mismatch, she filed a curative affidavit and quietly e-recorded a second transfer to a shell buyer who paid cash, minus a convenience fee to her brother's LLC. To evict quickly, they reported the owner for criminal interference with real property when she re-entered her own home. Email trails showed the manager coaching the buyer. "We need a police report to neutralize her lease pendants." On the stand, she said softly, "Everyone does corrective paperwork." The courtroom exhaled like a tire. Case dismissed, deed voided ab initio, and the DA pivoted to the people who forged the paperwork. The squatter was the only person on the deed who hadn't lied. Story 29. Deadbeat Dad? That was the headline. He faced jail for willful non-payment after a year of missed child support transfers. The payroll processor's compliance director arrived with a neat ledger of employer failed to remit entries. Defense asked why 3 months showed ACH returns with a bank code that belongs to the processor's own fiduciary account. The director claimed banking back-end noise. Subpoenaed statements showed float, funds withheld from paychecks parked in an overnight sweep account to earn interest, with disbursements batched monthly unless a return flag hit, which their system created when employer and case numbers didn't match exactly. The employer's HR system used leading zeros. The processor dropped them on import, auto-flagged invalid case, and sent a delinquency referral instead of fixing the mapping. Under oath, the director admitted they kept doing it because state contracts reward enforcement actions resolved and clean passes don't. Meanwhile, the father had receipts, pay stubs with garnishments taken, a bank letter showing the processor's return code, and emails where he begged customer service for a supervisor. The judge dismissed, ordered the arrears ledger corrected, and told the AG to look at the processor's float practices. The man dragged as a shirker had paid every dime. A system made of incentives ate it and called him a criminal. Story 30. Highway manslaughter trial. A refrigerated rig plowed into a night lane closure, killing a road worker. Dash telemetry put the driver at 53 miles per hour, then brake no response. The fleet maintenance chief strode in, blaming driver inattention. Defense asked about a recall on the trailer's auto-slack adjusters. He said the unit wasn't covered. Service tickets told another story. 3 DVIRs, daily vehicle inspection reports, in the week prior flagged long pedal and pull right, each closed as no fault found with his login. Under oath, he admitted parts were on back order. To keep utilization up and avoid paying rental trailers, he'd told his shop to rock back the adjusters by hand, illegal, and to clear driver defects if stopping distance felt fine in the yard. He also disabled the lane closure alert on the dash cam because false positives cost bonuses. The clincher, a time-stamped text he sent, "Roll it, we'll swing by after the run." Minutes before the crash, telematics showed the driver hit the pedal 2.1 seconds before impact. With proper slack, he would have stopped. The judge dismissed the criminal count against the driver and referred the fleet to OSHA and NHTSA. The guy plastered as a killer on the evening news? He was driving a booby trap signed off by the man who should have parked it.